Welcome back, everyone. Today's video, as you can see, is about slavery in the Western Hemisphere. I didn't want to have music playing because I didn't feel it was really appropriate when we consider the nature of the topic that we're about to discuss today. Your major goals that you're going to get is that this slavery in the Western Hemisphere was built through the system called triangle trade or the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to be looking at racism and resources as driving focuses for that. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And this is where we're going to kind of go off. We're just going to go off of a passage that you've read. Slavery in Americas is a different ballgame than what we saw in Europe. And we see in the first paragraph that it's all about the Spanish originally, and even the Portuguese, creating plantations in their Central American areas that needed workers. American Indian tribes had been wiped out in most cases because of lack of immunity to disease, being overworked on these plantations, and just the death and destruction brought on by the conquistador nature of the Spanish. So with this, there needed to be a different labor source, and we're going to get into that. What develops, though, because of mercantilism and this interest in profiting at all times for the homeland, is triangle trade. Okay, and this is the trade route between the Western Hemisphere, the colonies, Europe, and Africa, and how that works out. Now, there were multiple triangles, but this is the one that we want to really focus on. And the big deal is raw materials coming from the West over to Europe, slaves coming from Africa to the New World, and from Europe to Africa, resources that Africa did not have access to that tribes could use to gain their competitive advantage over somebody else, just like the French, the Spanish, and the English used against each other. And that might be weapons, it might be other forms of finished product technology that they just didn't have access to in Africa. As you continue to read, it talked about the need to have Africans take over the role of slaves. Now, the reason why Africans were picked is numerous reasons. They've been exposed to European disease already. Let's scroll back up to the map. As Europe began to explore, they went all around Africa. They had had trade relationships with Africa for years. So for Africans to see Europeans was not a big deal. And those diseases had already spread, so their immunity made them a much more successful trade item. Also, Africans were used to the climate. If you kind of look across the map, you'll see the climate would have been pretty similar in Africa to the Central and South American areas, the southern British colonies. So there was a familiarity with the climate, with the conditions, with the type of work. And of course, the biggest contributing factor that had developed with Native Americans was that there was a greed in Europe to have the most resources, to have the most money, to win it, pretty much. And in the past, slavery had always been, if you got beat in a war, you might have become a slave, or if you maybe were a criminal, you become a slave for a long time or temporarily, could work it off. No, that's not how it worked in the West. These European nations the monarchs convinced their religious leaders to preach that the skin color of a person made them weaker, made them a savage, that their belief in different religions made them lesser than human. And especially the skin color, the racist environment that was preached by religion and supported by the kings, convinced people that Africans, American Indians, but mainly Africans in this case, needed to be taken care of, needed the structure, needed slavery, which seems crazy to all of us today because that makes no logical sense. But skin color made a huge difference. This is the advent of racism in the New World, in the West. And this became a mentality throughout many of the regions, especially the English colonies, that Africans were designed weaker, that this was their true job, and that whites were supposed to take care of them. This trade of slaves is devastating to Africa. As it says, estimates of almost upwards of at least 12 million Africans are ripped out of their homes and brought to the New World. Just think about that. Ripped out of their homes. As the passage goes on, it talked about the conditions, wooden beds, cramped conditions for 3-month journey, suicide, disease, very, very common. Okay. If you were able to survive the journey, you would have more than likely landed in the Caribbean, but then spread out from there to either Southern English colonies or throughout all of Central South America, where there was a Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch colony, and agriculture would have been the major focus. So this system, and I'll scroll down to this so that you can see it a little bit better, even though I know it's my weird drawing. This system was designed through mercantilism to profit, as you see the resources on the top of the triangle, these European countries. It was fueled by greed and this racist desire to take advantage of people. This has a devastating impact on Europe. It has a devastating impact on race relations in the Americas. It still exists today. Also, the amount of resources taken from Native American tribes, from Africa. It is devastating the impact that this has, and we still see evidence of Africa's being carved apart by Europe. We see it on the map today. We see the impact on Central American countries today. Slavery, this is just a tip. Okay, getting slaves over here, the treatment, the development of it in the soon-to-be United States, has a footprint on what our society is like today beyond belief.